Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Kendra O'Neill, Director of Diversity and Community Engagement at Hill Learning Center. It's a joy to welcome you to tonight's Hill Connect webinar. Hill Connect is our free learning series designed to give families, educators, and professionals practical research-based tools to support students who learn and think differently. From learning differences and executive functioning to literacy, ADHD, and more, each session will offer timely insight you can put to use right away. We invite you to explore the full rest of our series that will end in March. Tonight, we're turning our attention to a question many families wrestle with. How can you tell what's expected growth and what might signal a need for support for your child? Parenting is tough, and it's not always easy to recognize what's expected at each age. Our goal tonight is to cut through the noise and offer practical guideposts to support your child's growth with clarity and confidence. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Academy for Institutional Investors, a boutique woman-owned organization that brings together senior investment leaders for high-quality educational forums and roundtable discussions. Founded in the Southeast and now national in reach, the Academy convenes top experts, allocators, and thought leaders to explore the complex issues shaping today's financial landscape. We're grateful for their support in making conversations like this possible. Tonight, we're honored to be joined by Dr. Joseph Vukin, a board-certified pediatrician and founder of Wayfaring Pediatrics, a direct primary care practice built on meaningful time with families and truly comprehensive relationship-centered care. He serves on the board of directors of Prevent Blindness North Carolina and the Public Policy Committee for the North Carolina chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. His professional interests include legislative advocacy, social determinants of health and medical ethics, and personally, he's a proud husband, father of two boys, an active runner, and a lover of time spent outdoors and in the kitchen. And if you enjoy podcasting like I do, check out his podcast that he co-hosts called Real Talk with Kid Docs. Thank you so much, Dr. Buchan. Take it away.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call out just the elephant in the room. The whole webinar format here, where I'm talking to myself on the camera, is kind of awkward, and so I'm going to imagine a sea of people in their underwear behind me, and all the laughter. I should upload a laugh track as well, but anyway, welcome to everybody, and I appreciate you carving out some time this evening for us. And as we dive into the discussion on learning differences. So I am pleased to be here. And again, this is an informal talk. And so if you guys have questions, please feel free to shoot them over and we can to discuss any concerns or questions that do arise. All right, so digging right in. Let's see here. We're going to do that. Okay. So as we discussed already, what we're going to talk is about learning differences in children. This is a hugely important topic for several reasons. And the first of which is that it's so common. And so primarily, I'm going to focus on two learning differences in particular, the first being dyslexia and the second ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There are studies that suggest that up to 10% of kids are diagnosed with dyslexia, and a similar amount actually as well diagnosed with ADHD between the ages of, I believe it was 3 to 17. And so, we're talking about not an insignificant minority of kids that we come across who are going to be struggling with reading and behavior challenges. I also want to reinforce that while we're going to be talking about a lot of these things as struggles, these are opportunities as well, and opportunities for us to support our children, to support their growth, and to really advocate for our kids' potential. So one of the big takeaways, which I'll hopefully shine through in this, is that as a parent, if there's ever something that worries you, then it behooves you to bring it up to any relevant party, whether that's a teacher, a principal, somebody at the school, your child's pediatrician, but to have that concern addressed. We need to be advocates for our kids because in many ways, early intervention is going to be key to really supporting our children and helping them thrive. And then the second thing I really wanted to hammer in on is we are sitting on computers under a roof. It's 7 o'clock in the evening. We've probably had, bellies full of food from dinner, but parenting is hard. And I'm going to also call that out there. There are days when my wife and I will put the kids to bed and we camp out on the couch and just sort of sit there in full exhaustion with all the day's things, parenting failures that we've had, things that we could have done better, even marital conversations about parenting that could have gone better. And so these topics are important not only to help us support our kids, but to also help us think about how we can thrive and become better parents in turn. So let's have grace with ourselves and our kids as we're going through these things and recognize that these are hard things. And then, as I already touched on, we can do something about this. And so we talk about dyslexia, we talk about ADHD, we talk about screening for these things because we have evidence-based tools, supports built in that can really help us improve our child's experience. So that's why this is important. Let me see, jumping back to as a note of transparency, I have no financial disclosures, conflicts of interest in talking about this material, except that I am a pediatrician, and so I want the best for your kids, and I'm also a father. And so I suppose that does present some bias, but anyway, nothing relevant here. All right, so we're going to start first with dyslexia. So I've talked about earlier, identification matters. There was a report that was done that suggested that dyslexia or reading proficiency could be thought of as a public health issue. This speaks to one of my interests as social determinants of health. These are characteristics such as housing, food security, financial security, literacy, numeracy, things like that, that truly affect the health of one's experience and life. And so, talking about reading proficiency as a public health issue really made me kind of sit back and say, gosh, we really need to do a good job about understanding what are normal milestones and helping family understand what are normal speech and language milestones so that we can in turn reinforce how important reading proficiency is for the kids out there. And as I mentioned earlier, 5 to 10% of children are going to be struggling with the learning difference of dyslexia. Now, I'm all for formality and big fancy definitions, but I don't find that helps super much when we're talking about practical steps and when I'm working with families in my office. And so I'm in my office and I'm working with some families, so I'm going to pretend you're here as well. I've got a big fancy definition there. The important parts are underlined here, but just so we've done it, the International Dyslexia Association defines dyslexia as a specific learning disability. And I'm going to put disability here in quotes. I'm going to go back to that in a minute because now let's just do it now. Disability can, I think, make some of us think prematurely that whether we're talking about dyslexia or ADHD or other things that are technically termed disabilities, that we are sort of referring to their kids as disabilities, as second-class citizens, as things that need to be fixed. And I want to reinforce that that's the farthest thing from the truth. However, we do need to be very specific and consistent with the language that we use as we're discussing these terms. So it is formally recognized as a specific learning disability, but again, disability here is sort of in air quotes. And I think that we'll see that dyslexia is, we were talking before the slideshow began, can be seen kind of as a superpower. So let's keep that in mind. But a specific learning disability, and it's characterized by difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition, poor spelling and decoding abilities. When we use words like decoding, we're talking about more of the meta of reading and speaking, and decoding is sounding out words. It has to deal with more of the phonics and the phonetics of words. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. Again, that's the phonics, the makeup of words, recognition that words are made up of letters, and letters have corresponding sounds. And so the rest of that you can read, but those are the big things that I wanted to show from this formal definition from the IDA that's also been adopted formally by the United States National Institutes of Child Health and Human Development. Now let's get over to the basics, sort of the fun stuff. This is where I am talking with my families and saying, let's cut through the stuff and just talk real. When we're talking about dyslexia, what is it? You know what? It is an unexpected difficulty in reading for a kid who has a cognitive capacity beyond which we'd expect their reading to be. So if your kid comes in, they are neurotypical and their reading is struggling behind, then I say, well, let's dig into that deeper. Let's see where that is. And so an unexpected difficulty in reading. Let's start with that. As you saw in the previous definitions related to phonetic awareness, since that's an appreciation that the individual sounds of spoken language, so letters have associated sounds, those sounds come together to form words, spoken language. People with dyslexia usually have trouble matching letters they see on a page with the sounds those letters and the combination of letters make. And when that's difficult, it makes everything else beyond that harder, including reading out loud, reading comprehension, increasing vocabulary. Interestingly, kids may have a really difficult time reading a passage on their own, but kids who have dyslexia may be really, really smart when it comes to learning information, understanding information, applying information when it's read to them. So even though they might struggle reading the information themselves, if it's read, for instance, a book on tape, or if it's read aloud, a lecture given, orally, those are strategies where kids with dyslexia can really thrive. And as we'll see later, strategies that can help them excel in the classroom. What we do know is that family history is important in dyslexia. There is some heritability. And so in first degree relatives, whether it's a mom or a dad or a sibling, those are important risk factors for children when we're talking about screening for dyslexia. And we always like to be able to narrow down what's the cause. Can we modify any variables to impact a cause of a known condition? Well, as are a lot of these neuro differences, the cause is unknown but multifactorial. That's our fancy way of saying, you know what? It's genes, it's environmental, and we kind of don't know exactly, but we see that based on these research studies, there's a lot that goes into it, but we haven't nailed down specifically one thing that causes it. Now, one of the things with dyslexia and ADHD that I really like to hammer home with families is that as frustrating, especially with ADHD, as frustrating as it can be to get sort of nasty grams sent home from teachers that are suggesting that behavior's out of control, or, your kid doesn't seem to be paying attention, he's daydreaming, dyslexia and ADHD are not related to intelligence or effort. And I'm going to say that again because I think it's so important that we change this paradigm that's, I don't want to say pervasive, but at least before I kind of got into this as a pediatrician, you sort of think, oh, this is just kind of a lazy kid. Well, dyslexia and attention deficit hyperactivity are not related to effort or intelligence. I can't remember if I said earlier, I have lived with ADHD my entire life. I was only diagnosed as an adult. So before medical school, I was a lawyer. And just before law school, I was finally, I say finally because I felt like this was my awakening, but diagnosed with ADHD. And that really, that was a huge transformation in, I think, my trajectory, but also my understanding of my habits as a student, as a friend, as a boyfriend, as all those things, because ADHD was so pervasive in my life. And so finally recognizing that, hey, I didn't struggle because I wasn't trying. I didn't struggle because I wasn't smart, or I'm sorry, I struggled not because I wasn't trying or because I wasn't smart enough, but it had to do with biology and that my brain was different. And that really took a lot of pressure off and helped helped kind of build up some of my self-esteem that I thought was that had been kind of bruised for a long time. So anyway, let's see. Down at the bottom, I thought this is kind of a fun exercise. I found this simulation. I'm going to click this link, and I want everybody to take a peek. I'm going to be quiet for a couple minutes, or not a couple minutes, a couple seconds. What's going to pop up is a field of text. Some of you may have seen this before, but this is a simulation of what it's like to look through somebody's eyes with dyslexia. And so imagine yourself reading this passage, and I'm going to scroll up here and try to, I'll give you guys, 15, 20 seconds. Try to scroll through that as your eyes are reading as you normally would. See what you can make of it. And so this was kind of a fun sort of example that I found to imagine what it would be like with dyslexia. You see the letters bouncing around. It's hard to even read and maintain your focus from word to word. It slows you down so much if you're even able to make out what the words are. And that really reinforced to me you could probably get the gist of this paragraph, but it would take so long. It's so effortful and so slow. And that makes everything after it that much harder, right? So I thought that was a cool simulation. All right, so without knowing what are normal milestones, we can't then judge what is abnormal or what is concerning. And so I want to go through first, what are some normal speech and language milestones for kids? These are things that we expect and that will be screened in by your pediatrician, that you will likely come across as you're reading any new parenting book. That anybody with kids around you will be looking for and saying, oh, is she talking yet? Is she smiling yet? Is he, all the things. And so let's figure out what's normal. So then we can talk about if these things aren't in place or if other things have supplanted them, maybe those are red flags that we should get evaluated. So starting from the beginning, you've got a new baby coming home. Infancy is the period from birth until 12 months of life. So when kids come into my office, your pediatrician is a great source of these milestones, but there will be, I'll show you a resource list at the end, which is going to have milestone trackers. Some of you may be familiar with these. There are apps that you can download. The CDC also has a great list of milestones, normal milestone achievements for kids. But anyway, so infancy, you bring the child home. We think about baby's first sounds. There's going to be cooing sounds that are going to start somewhere between 2 to 3 months, laughing somewhere between 3 and 6 months, and then babbling when the kids start almost sounding like they're talking back and forth to us, and it's going to be with a lot of consonant sounds. Ga, 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 ma, 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 ra, 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 ra. Those kinds of repetitive babbling sounds. Getting into it more specifically, that's a little bit more out of the scope of this. If there's speech language pathologists listening, you're going to cringe at some of my descriptions here, but I think that they are adequate for this talk. There are more specific breakdowns in between jargoning and specific jargoning, mature jargoning. But for the purposes of this, we see this slow progression between cooing, kind of a to kids laughing, to a babbling, recognizing that they have a voice between, starting around 2 months, then 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months, and on. Usually parents are coming in a little bit earlier than what I would normally expect, suggesting that their kids are talking, saying mama, dad, very specifically. And I don't have the heart to tell them, and maybe they are, but most kids aren't going to be saying these words until close to 12 months. But again, mama, dada, at least consistently till about 12 months. So one of the questions I ask in my office is your child using those words? With specificity, we think that words are going to start having some meaning around 15 months. Okay, so mama, dada, maybe a few other words around 12 months. 15 months, I'm looking for about 3 to 5 words, again, in air quotes to suggest that I would accept ba for ball. It's always going to be that utterance, that recognition that a word, that a sound relates to an object. Okay. Let's see, kids are going to start responding to their name early on. Of course, they start recognizing a familiar face and a familiar sound much earlier in life, close to 2 to 4 months, but responding specifically to their name during the latter part of infancy. And then their ability to identify the source of sound. So to look around and recognize, I hear something, it's coming from somewhere. That also is in that latter part of infancy. As toddlers, so we're progressing on after the 12-month mark. So toddlerhood is age, from 12 months to 24 to 36 to 48 months of life. Kids start to recognize that words have this meaning. So as I was suggesting earlier, ba means ball. It's always that sound, that utterance for the object. Kids around 15 months, again, 3 to 5 words, 18 months, there's going to be this huge explosion for most kids, somewhere around 25 to 50 words, and then on to 24 months, it's going to blow up maybe 50 to 100 words. I always find it challenging in my office when I talk to families and say, hey, how many words does your kid have? And then I think, oh, I don't know how many words my kid has. Granted, they're 8, but 8 and 4. But when they were that age, I don't know. They've got a lot. They talk all the time, right? So, are we looking for a specific number? No, but more important is that they are starting to use words for specific objects and that their vocabulary is slowly increasing. When I start to get worried is if kids start to plateau and don't continue to learn new words, or if they start to regress and not use those words that they previously had. Importantly, too, in toddlerhood, kids are going to start stringing words together. So one of the questions I ask at the 24-month or 2-year well check is your child starting to say 2 to 3 word sentences, phrases? More please, milk please, all done, things like that would be appropriate for stringing words together. Again, as kids are getting older, now we're in the preschool age. So we're talking about, let's see, this example I thought was helpful. Kids are going to start to recognize or memorize words as they appear, but not really know what it means. So this is the example, the pre-alphabetic kind of phase. So they might recognize on a stop sign the red octagon and the word stop on there. They'll recognize what the word is, but if they were to see that word on a note card, it wouldn't mean the same thing. So parents may come in and say, oh, my kid's reading, he knows the stop sign, he knows the, whatever. And it's probably not that they're reading. They've just memorized in the context of that red octagon that there is an image up there, and they've memorized that and have associated that with stop. Let's see, kids in preschool, they're going to be starting to rhyme. As we'll see, this is going to be an important milestone or an important flag when kids aren't able to rhyme. So common nursery rhymes, that's why we all love, the play school songs and Miss Rachel and all the things. They've got the fun songs that have all the rhyming words, Jack and Jill. And so recognizing that words sound similar to others, words have similar sounds to others is an important milestone. And let's see, by the end of kindergarten, so we've got preschool, and then we're going to jump into kindergarten. Most kids are starting to recognize the letters, both upper and lowercase. I should say, let me jump back real quick to preschoolers. Kids are going to start learning the letters in their name. Kids may also know the alphabet and can pick out some letters of the alphabet. But by the end of kindergarten, most of the letters of the alphabet, upper and lowercase, and they can give the name for sounds of single letters. So A, B, B, right? And so recognizing that words or that those letters have sounds. By the end of grade 1, they can decode a wide variety of unfamiliar one-syllable regular words. So again, decoding is sounding out words. So cat, bat, I know those words rhyme, but again, more like sight words. And when kids are writing, that the misspellings look closer to real words because they understand that words the sounds in words. I saw this most recently on a my child's letter to Santa, and he wrote, I'm not going to think of it now that I'm in the moment. If I think of it, I'll go back. But it was so close to the word. It was phonetically spelled properly. But anyway, misspellings will look closer to real words because kids are progressing in their understanding that words are made up of letters and those letters have sounds. By the end of grade 2, children will have an increased ability to sound out unfamiliar and long words. And then they're also going to be able to read faster and with greater comprehension. By the end of grade 3, they've mastered basic word decoding skills, and their fluency, which is their ability to read text quickly and accurately, is very well established. So kids by the end of grade 3 are going to be reading pretty well and independently. All right, so now that we know what speech and language milestones our kids should be achieving, then we can have a better appreciation for what we should look out for. What are some red flags? What are some practical kind of guideposts that we can use? Where can we set our barometer, in other words, to say, is this normal? Is this concerning? Is it not normal? Again, I want to put a plug in here. If there is a concern, if you're worried, I'm worried. My patients get tired. The patients in my practice get tired of hearing me say this. But if you're worried, I'm worried. Until we can talk about it and either triage and reassure each other, or recognize that, yeah, that's concerning, let's make a plan and do something about it, then you should be an advocate for your kid. So if any of these are present, then by all means, I would encourage you to reach out to teacher, principal, anybody at the school, your pediatrician, and have a chat. So dyslexia, let's talk about dyslexia and how it might present in preschoolers. So difficulties in the following areas. We've already talked about nursery rhymes. Again, that recognition that words are made up of letters, and those letters have sounds. So Jack and Jill, Humpty Dumpty, cat, bat, rat. If kids are having trouble with rhymes, that can be a sign. Pronouncing words that look alike. Learning and remembering the names of letters. My youngest son is 4 right now. You'll hear me relate a lot of this to my family or myself, well, because it's what I know best. But but also, it's bananas how much I grew as a pediatrician since I had kids. It's not to suggest that pediatricians who don't have kids aren't good, competent doctors, but for me specifically, all of this came into focus so much more brightly having children. And now that they're going through it, seeing, oh, I used to do that. Man, that didn't make any sense at all. I feel really bad for recommending that for parents. Or, when it comes to things like this, my younger son right now, oh, golly, he's having a hard time with letters. And so, putting this presentation together, I'm thinking, scratching my head, oh, should we call his pediatrician and get him checked out? But anyway, remembering the names of letters. Poor expressive language. So language is made up of our receptive capacity, and that relies on us having the ability to hear, and then process words and process understanding, and then speak and say a response. And so we've got the receptive capacity and then expressive language or expressive capacity. So how are the kids' language milestones coming along? Persistent baby talk, failure to know letters of one's own name. So that's an important one. All right, kindergarten and first grade. So your kids in kindergarten and you're wondering how they're doing. I would be at least, I would want to at least follow a kid a bit more closely if we're having a failure to understand that words come apart. You'll see the example here, compound words, bat, boy, bat and boy, that those two words can be put together and taken apart. And then you've got these two individual words that have unique sounds. And then, as you see there at the end, bat can be broken down into its individual letters that have corresponding sounds. The inability to recognize that B makes B, the sound. Reading errors that make no connection to the sounds of letters. So you'll see some kids with dyslexia will make wild guesses at words because they sort of recognize the beginning of it, and in the context of the phrase, they think that they know what it is, but make guesses that have nothing to do with the actual word itself. Inability or difficulty with sight words, complaints about how hard reading is. Reading that passage, if I had to read to learn. So that's a more advanced skill. Early on, kids learn to read. And then about third grade or so, the focus shifts and kids then read to learn content, right? And so if you're struggling with that, I wouldn't like to read. That would be the last thing that I'd want to do. I want to go do anything else except read. So kids who are persistently turning away from books, I don't want to read, that's, putting it off. Again, we're looking for a family history of reading problems and such. So these would be risk factors by kindergarten and first grade. Second grade and onward, school performance declines. So as I said, this is roughly where you're going to be starting to read with better fluency and more quickly. And at that point, your grades will likely have started to fall behind just a little bit. So school performance declines. And you'll see some kids start to take a hit to kind of their self-esteem, whether they are, not included because they're not reading all the Harry Potter books, so they can't be part of that club and talk about the things, or they are always the last ones doing a task at school. And so you'll feel some kids that start to complain about somatic things like, my stomach hurts, and wanting to skip school or wanting to avoid certain tasks. And so that's another kind of clue that might push you toward thinking about when that happens and what task is occurring when that happens. All right. And then again, difficulty with word recognition slows the learning process, takes up cognitive resources. We're so focused on figuring out what that word is that we don't have the ability to focus on reading the sentence and understanding what the information the sentence is trying to convey. So this makes everything more difficult. All right, let's jump for a second. I've talked a lot about struggles. This page, arguably, but I'm going to go ahead and make the argument, this is full of not struggles, but successes. Tom Cruise, Albert Einstein, we've got Cher, we've got Whoopi Goldberg, Richard Branson, we've got Steven Spielberg. I mean, these people have been diagnosed with dyslexia, have risen to the top of their game, have been innovators, and I think by all accounts, whatever your standard is, have made significant improvements in our communities. And so a diagnosis of dyslexia does not mean that your child is broken, does not mean that they need to be fixed. What it means is that we need to recognize how they learn and how to support them, and that they can succeed. So dyslexia, what we do, I've said already, early intervention. We need to screen kids, and we need to refer them to appropriate places as early as we start to think something's going on. So act early and express the concerns to teachers and pediatricians. Again, pediatricians are in a great spot to do this because they're going to be with your kids from day one, and they'll have a history to recognize normal developmental milestones, and to kind of think about where their reading or language is in the context of that. Schools, you can request an evaluation from school. I'll get into this just a little bit later, but there are state and federal laws that protect children with disabilities in education. So reaching out to your principals, your teachers, and just having a conversation. I spoke with one of my friends before this, talking about behavior intervention plans and functional behavior assessments, and all these acronyms for things that can be done in school that have to happen before an IEP or a 504 or a, whatever. All you need to do, practical steps for families, go up to your teacher and say, hey, can I get a meeting? I'm concerned because my kid seems to be struggling. Do you see that in class? That's where the conversation starts. Be real, be plain, and recognize too that your child is entitled to, and law is in place to provide evaluations for kids at risk. There's always an opportunity for private tutoring for evaluations. And then typically the people that I'm referring off to when I consider speech language differences are to speech language pathologists. That's synonymous with a speech therapist. Neurologist or developmental behavioral pediatrician is also a good place to start here if you're not going to be going through the school system. All right, and as I said, this is a list of resources. I'll have this at the end as well. I found Understood to be super helpful. Reading Rockets is a great website. The Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity has a lot of good practical very palatable, easy to read information on it. And of course, healthychildren.org. This is the website hosted by the American Academy of Pediatrics. In addition to dyslexia, this talks about all things kids, but as one of the resources that they have there, healthychildren.org. All right, I'm going to transition. I'm a dad. I can't be a dad without being corny and liking jokes. I'm going to assume everybody is laughing now. All right, thank you. Appreciate you putting up with me. All right, let's go to ADHD. We're going to stretch a little bit, take a deep breath. I know we're about halfway through. Bear with me. It's Tuesday night, 7:30. We're rocking and rolling here. All right. I laughed before I came in because I think an appropriate video for this opening slide for ADHD would have been my house. I have two kids, like I said, 8 and 4, running around the kitchen, trying to get them to sit down to eat dinner. Can you please do that? Can you please do that? Doing the opposite of what we want them to do, asking 100 times, all the things. My house was the picture of ADHD. But let's see some phrases here. If any of these resonate with you, and I'm sure that some will, this is very classic of kids who are struggling with ADHD. My child seems to have endless energy. Yep, that's mine. Never listens. And I have to ask him 25 times to do something. And that doesn't get finished. All right, buddy, we do the same thing every single night. You're 8 years old. We brush our teeth. We put our pajamas on. We take our meds. We pick out our books. We clean our room, like all the things. It's been every single night for the last 8 years. But still, it takes almost these micromanaging. Tell them to go upstairs to their room, get dressed. 10 minutes later, you find them playing with their toys, only their shirt on. I'm sure that's what my wife is going through right now. Not her, but my kids. They're playing with their toys with just a shirt on. She's fully dressed. You can't get them to sit down and finish a meal. Yes, yep, interrupting constantly, personal space. And then this idea of, all right, ready, fire, aim. Well, there's something backwards there, right? So these will likely resonate in one way or another with most people watching this. And this is very much both of what I see and what I felt as someone who lived with ADHD and continues to live with ADHD for a long, long time. So let's all take a deep breath. It's going to be good. We're going to figure this out. ADHD is not a lack of effort. It is not a cognitive incapacity. We've got another picture collage. Who do we have here? Jim Carrey, Zoe Deschanel, the Raging Cajun. We've got JT, Michael Jordan, athletes, movie stars, innovators. I mean, ADHD, dyslexia, lots of learning differences. They are not a death sentence. I have families who come in, understandably, they're very tearful when we talk about these things. But I'll tell you, we can and we have resources to help support kids. And that is such an important thing for families to recognize. It can be difficult to get there. I have a lot of families who, for instance, are struggling with the idea of starting medicines for the kid with ADHD. But I'll tell you, there are so many ways that we can help kids, and medicine is just one of them. And we'll talk through some of those here in just a second. All right, ADHD, the basics. So ADHD is a common condition, like I said earlier, up to 10% of kids in some studies. And it makes it hard for kids to focus, to keep still, to think before acting. Ready, aim, ready, fire, aim, right? It's related to relative immaturity of the brain centers that are important in emotional regulation. That's why you see kids with ADHD sometimes struggle with these huge tantrums, emotional outbursts, sometimes just being really sensitive. With planning and executive function, that's all going to be in the prefrontal cortex here of the brain. And so emotional immaturity of brain centers and a relative lack of the appropriate neurotransmitters. I'll talk about neurotransmitters here in a second. Family history, again, is super important here. Unfortunately, my kids got my genes. I am almost certain in the next couple of years, we will be talking about a diagnosis of ADHD in at least one of them. And that's okay. That's okay. And let's go back. It's fine. Everything's going to be fine. What we need to do is recognize the playing field, right? If we don't accept or understand our reality, we can't do anything meaningful going forward. All right. Three types of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We've got the inattentive type, which is also kind of the difficulty with focus. So trouble with focus, inattentive. These kids are not bouncing around their room. These kids are more often underdiagnosed or diagnosed until later because they're not the ones, I don't want to say causing problems, but they're not the ones who are on the teacher's radar because they're all over the place. We've also got the hyperactive impulsive type, and then we've got a combined type. Again, it's not related to laziness or effort. This is a biological process in the brain. All right, very quick tutorial. This fancy thing on the right that looks like a Q-tip and a male and a female plug. One side is the end of a neuron. The other side is the beginning of a neuron. In between is called a synapse. We activate the subsequent neuron by putting into that open space, the synapse, what are called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are chemicals that help conduct signals. In kids with ADHD, and one of the targets of ADHD medicine, i.e. stimulant medicines, there's a relative lack of those neurotransmitters. So when we're talking, everybody's probably heard of Ritalin, of Focalin, of Concerta. These medicine, and I'm using brand names only because that was on the top of my head. Apologize, I should have used generics. But those medicines target by increasing the amount of dopamine and norepinephrine in some of these synapses so as to enhance the signal across from one neuron to the others. And those neurons taking place in areas of the brain that regulate emotion, executive function, things like that. All right, so when am I going to be concerned about a kid who might be presenting with ADHD? Preschool to grade 2, having trouble following directions. Well, gosh, that almost seems like all kids in preschool to grade 2. Put on your backpack. I have to ask you 25 times to do it. Important here is that the trouble following directions, and for all of these are things that start to impair the child's experience, okay? So think of it that way. We want to see them typically in 2 domains, so at home and at school, at home and at sports, and we want to see things, behaviors that are affecting a child's learning, affecting a child's ADLs, that's more of an adult word, but activities of daily living. All right, another sign, getting up, fidgeting, talking during quiet activities, not slowing down enough to do things carefully, hurrying through assignments, not taking time while you're practicing your handwriting to actually write the letters the correct way, grabbing things without permission, kind of not appreciating one's space, just sort of doing without thinking, having trouble remembering things that were just taught to you. So 2 + 2 = 4. Great, I've got it in my immediate recall, but 5 minutes later, I don't know. That's lost and gone to me. And then getting upset or angry over minor things. Kids with ADHD will also can present by being not wanting to try at first, or trying, and if they don't succeed right away, they don't want to do it anymore. This can look like being a perfectionist. If I can't hit the ball the first time, then I'm not going to do it because I must not be good at it, and I don't want to do things that I'm not good at, or I don't want to take the time and put in the effort to do the things that come more difficult or harder. And then not appreciating that you shouldn't know how to hit a ball. You've never practiced, and so that it does take work. All right, so jumping up in grade, we've got grades 3 to 7, early signs of ADHD, putting off tasks like writing an essay. I'm going to be honest, I am a bit of a procrastinator. That probably is one of the parts of my ADHD that comes through. I have known about this presentation for months, and I'm very happy with the presentation, but yeah, I procrastinate a bunch. Rushing through schoolwork, again, we saw that in the younger kids. Messy, careless mistakes in the schoolwork. Let's see, clowning around, kind of your typical class clown, saying or doing things without thinking about the consequences. My older son likes to whip his loveys at my son, and he says he doesn't intend to hit him, but he does it right next to his face. Well, you're going to hit him. Your aim's not that great, buddy. Like, you know, think about what's happening. Well, he doesn't think about the consequences. And then having trouble following directions. and so forth. So what can we do at home? I really love this conversation with families because I think there's so much empowerment that we can do to help recognize our kids' strengths and their challenges, and to recognize that this is the hard part. We can't just want them to be different or want them to do the right thing. We need to change how we parent and how we see our kids to help influence their behavior changes. There was a show, Caesar the Dog Whisperer, is that what it is? And he used to say that he doesn't train dogs, he trains owners, right? I think of this in a similar way when I'm talking with parents about ADHD. We are recognizing where your child is, and we are adapting our behavior within limits to see them, to hear them, and to work within their reality as best that we can to help support their behavior. Okay, so recognizing the reality of the situation, what does the playing field look like? This can be hard at times because it's a real gut check for some families who don't want to admit that their kid it has a learning difference. Well, you know what? Let me go back. It's fine. We need to know these things so that we can help our kids thrive. Again, we've seen pictures. This is a cheap shot. I should have pictures of the kids in my practice. I should have pictures of myself and all of the kids that are thriving with ADHD or with dyslexia. Okay. All right, let me go back. So another thing that we can do, we struggle because as parents, we always want to hope that next time it's going to be different. Scrap that. Expect the expected. If night times are a challenge, expect they're going to be a challenge. Okay. Recognize that this is where my kid has a struggle. He's going to dig his heels in when he doesn't want to transition from the after dinner play to the pre-bedtime kind of routine. I need to recognize and expect that transition will take longer. And I need to adapt my behavior and my strategies to meet him where he is, whether that's giving a countdown, repeating, hey, man, we're going to do this in 10 minutes. Hey, bud, we got 5 more minutes. We've all heard friends and families say that, and we kind of roll our eyes thinking, man, why didn't your kid just do it? Or thinking, that it's so intensive. But I'll tell you, these are the things that really matter for kids. My son told me the other day, Daddy, I really don't hear you when I asked him to do something just verbally. He didn't hear me, and we kind of had a little disagreement. He said, Daddy, I didn't hear you. And I said, what would help? And he said, if you touch me, if next time touch my arm. You know what? That is a great thing. Having your child's input about what will help them, this multi-sensory approach. Let's give you a verbal, hey, we're going to leave in 10 minutes. And then also, hey, bud, rub their arm. Hey, bud, making eye contact. We're going to leave in 10 minutes, okay? Having that engagement really matters. Reframing the situation too. So for a lot of parents and kids, we see behavior, but we don't look to what the antecedent is. This is another thing, the ABC, antecedent behavior consequence. Frequent, we look to the behavior and want to jump right to a consequence instead of looking back and saying, what caused that behavior? What was going through my child's experience or through their head that caused them to do this? I know I'm talking a lot about behavior, but with ADHD, it's a lot of behavior. And that behavior reflects, if we can modify behavior, then we can get better learning in the classroom. So reframing situations. And then as I talked about, inattentive type, hyperactive, impulsive types. So the inattentive type, we're going to think about using timers to sort of let the kids know, I know you have trouble with focus. We're going to chunk your assignment. We're going to break it down into smaller bits because I know you can stay focused for 10 minutes, not this whole hour of homework. Let's do 10 minutes. We're going to set a timer, do 10 minutes, get up, run around 5 minutes, and sit back down for another 10 minutes, okay? Inattentive type is going to have trouble with focus. So we need to make focusing and sitting down to do a task easier for kids. When it comes to hyperactive, impulsive type, kids with fidget toys can help a lot. Kids like to move. My wife is an occupational therapist, and she brought home these bands that she put around the feet of the chairs at our dining room table. I'll tell you, that made a huge difference because the kids will then sit there, being fidgety all under the table with their feet, moving around, getting all their wiggles out. And they sat there for like 10 minutes. It wasn't the whole dinner, but man, that was a significant improvement. So we can make these modifications at home and think through creatively to help our children get find the behavior that we are hoping, and that also slows them down to have meaningful engagement. All right, ADHD, who are you going to call? The Ghostbusters are not going to be the go-to for this, but what we're looking for, again, pediatricians. All right, there are a lot of pediatricians, primarily, I think pediatricians are diagnosing ADHD in kids. We do this through a variety of mechanisms, but please bring this up to your pediatrician if you have any concerns about behavior or ADHD specifically. Some pediatricians may not feel comfortable, and they'll want to get you over to perhaps a neurologist, a developmental behavioral pediatrician, or a psychiatrist or psychologist, and to have a further look. But I would certainly bring this up to your pediatrician. That is well within the domain of primary care to treat and diagnose attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I reach out to our friends at occupational therapy for so many things. They are wonderful. And occupational therapy for play therapy, for behavior management, for you name it. OTs are so creative. I'm not just saying that because my wife is one, and I promise she's not in here, but love you, Laura. Thanks. OTs do great work. And so we frequently visit with our occupational therapists for kids with ADHD. For the older kids, executive function coaching. And so this really is kind of a, I don't know, I'd say maybe middle school and up type of situation where kids can interact and really engage with a therapist to talk about organization, strategizing what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, verbalizing what the challenges are, and how they might work through them, typically as it relates to school. Parent-child interactive therapy. PCIT is a great program for kids and parents to sort of learn how to do it together, how to have a better experience, and how to kind of get a new framework for parenting. All right, ADHD resources, again, Understood is a great website. Childmind.org is awesome. There's lots of good resources here. I'll see if I can't send these out if the slides aren't available, but there's some wonderful resources. Triple P, Positive Parenting Program. This is a free program here in North Carolina. And if you just did a Google search for Triple P, that'll pop up. And this is a parenting class that works specifically with kids with behavioral challenges, and I think would do well for parents who aren't worried about their kids' learning differences. It is just a wonderful sort of new perspective on how we can support our kids in positive ways. All right, so schools, very quickly, I am not an expert on this, and so I will say just the 30,000-foot view. Schools can support kids in a lot of different ways. There is going to be a difference between the resources available to some degree at public schools versus private schools. Public schools are required to comply with those federal regulations, specifically the IDEA and the I'm going to forget the other one, but in the 504 that require accommodations, interventions, evaluations for kids with learning disabilities and learning differences. But you've got an educational framework that I think is largely used across the state of North Carolina called the MTSS, Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. If you think of a pyramid, you've got most kids, all kids here at the base level of the pyramid. And then as kids are identified and need further supports for whatever that might be, whether it's a specific subject or behavioral things within the school system, they kind of pop up. And as you get closer and closer to the tip of the pyramid, there's 3 stages. The accommodations kind of get more specific, and they are geared towards data collected from the previous stages. So throughout those jumps in the pyramid, the multi-tiered pyramid, there's assessments that are done to see what challenges kids are facing and what help they need. As I mentioned, psych ed evaluations, this is something that can be done through the schools or privately. 504s and IEPs, I didn't used to know the difference here. 504s basically, you can think of it as IEP is more intensive, 504 is less. And there's specific requirements for each of these. But a 504 is going to allow a student to have accommodations. They're still learning under the same curriculum, but to have accommodations at school, whether that's extra time with tests, preferential seating closer to the board or in a different room, things like that. Whereas an IEP is defined as special education, spec ed, and that's going to be modifications made to the curriculum to help those children thrive. All right, guys, we did it. We are toward the end, and I think I'm right on time here. Learning differences, if you took away nothing else aside from my dad joke in the middle, I want you to remember this. It's important to identify kids and recognize the landscape because we can do things to help kids. Early intervention is key. We are blessed to live, at least those of you watching here in the central part of North Carolina, we've got doctors and therapists and educational support all over. This is not a resource desert, and we should utilize the resources that we have. If we have a concern, we need to get it taken care of, or we need to let somebody know. Parents, you know your child better than anyone ever will. The first thing I tell families after, if you're worried, I'm worried, is you know your kid better than me, better than I ever will. If there's something on your mind, I want to know about it. I want to know about it. All right. So be an advocate for your child. Don't ever feel like, well, they said no, I don't want to be a pest. You are your child's best advocate. I hope that empowers you. And yeah, I think that is what I've got. These are the resources I've got for you. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. Again, my goal is to make this sort of a light and very practical approach to two of the main things that I see in my office, dyslexia, ADHD, and some of the bigger challenges that parents have. So yeah, thank you all for your attention. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vukin, for all of those wonderful slides that had such valuable and rich information. We do have a couple of questions in the chat that we can go over at this time. The first one was from the beginning of your presentation. One of our audience members asked, have you seen that the IDA adopted a new definition of dyslexia, and will that be used by health professionals like pediatricians?
Great question. I am not familiar with that new definition. I thought that I was working under the latest adopted definition. So yeah, I assume that it will be. And thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'll have to look into that.
The second question is, do pediatricians evaluate students for dyslexia, or do they typically refer out?
Yeah, great question. I think that depends on the pediatrics practice. So one of the things that I've started to do is have early reader books in my office. And so one of the benefits of my style of practice is that I get to spend an hour basically, for a well visit with kids. It's harder in practices where the timing is shorter. But if the pediatrician is able to have that time and ask at the very minimum targeted questions about those age-specific milestones, then that can be kind of a gross screen for it. If you've got the time, or if you had a specific concern and wanted to go in specifically to ask questions about dyslexia, that's another way you could do that if the timing was short for the well visits. And so I think it depends on the practice. In general, if there is a concern about dyslexia, I would refer that over to my friends in speech pathology.
Okay. Our next question is the difference between a slow learner and someone who is dyslexic.
That's a great question. I think it depends in what ways the learning was slow. We see these milestones as ranges, not as absolutes. And so there's a lot of kids who catch up, right? Who we might say, oh, their language is a little behind, but then they catch up and 3 months later. I think that while wait and see can be dangerous with some of these things, as again, reiterating early intervention, it might depend for me on what that is. There's more nuance to that question than I think I can answer without more information. And so I'd have a chat with the parent and the child more specifically
Okay.
and figure out where the comfort is. Do we want to just refer and see? Do we want to follow up in 3 months and see what the progress has been? Something like that.
This is a question. Thankfully, we don't ever experience this at Hill. What would you tell educators that push back on using terms like dyslexia and insist that it's a medical diagnosis?
Um, let's see. I'm not entirely sure I understand the spirit of the question. Let's see. Where is that? Do you need a formal diagnosis? For zero nursing students, do you need a diagnosis? Related to my
We
last.
don't have any additional information. That person has asked has asked great questions, so that they may will go on to the next one.
Okay.
Um, so following that, do you need a formal diagnosis if a child has delayed processing and needs extra time for exams?
So my understanding is that you can have accommodations for a 504 and have, extra time on exams without a formal diagnosis, but you would have at least um, you would have a either data from the kind of MTSS that's shown that you're struggling in
Yes.
certain areas, or that you have a kind of a track record of difficulties in one area or another. Certainly, a diagnosis of dyslexia or ADHD can be helpful, and some
Mhm.
parents push for a diagnosis because that allows us to get more easily the systems in place and the supports. Um, but yeah, that's a great question. I believe that's the answer, but I'd be open to learning differently if that's not the case.
Okay. And our final question for tonight is there are a few nursing students on here, and they're asking, what is your input on how to best care for children with learning disabilities in the hospital setting?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it depends. Are we talking about kind of chronic
I'm
patients?
assuming so. Yeah, maybe hospital bound for a continuous amount of time.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be too much different. Obviously, the therapy services are going to be available there, probably a little bit easier than they would be on the outside. And so getting therapy involved would be one of the primary goals I'd have. Learning disabilities, what else could we do? Depending on the condition as well. I don't know that it would be too much different aside from the fact that they might have easier access to the therapy services. Um, Again, I think I'd need to know a little bit more about the question. And for those who have asked, I don't know if there's a way to do this, but I'd be happy to, if people wanted to shoot some questions or elaborate more on those question stems, I'd be happy to if I don't have the answer, to look it up or think more deeply about it and then get back to them. But I think I'd need more information. But off the top of my head, I think it would be fairly similar to those on the outside. They might have easier access to some of the services they require.
And we did get a follow-up on that question from earlier about pushback.
Yeah.
I asked a question about pushback about dyslexia. Unfortunately, in my state, some public schools do not use the word dyslexia openly and say that they can't diagnose it. Instead, they say the family would need to seek out a private eval for it.
Hmm. Um, that's an interesting one. I haven't come across that.
Okay.
And so I would have to look into that. I don't know the answer, but again, if that person is able or wants to reach out to me separately, I'm happy to think on it and kind of soundboard with you. But I don't know the answer to that offhand.
Well, again, Dr. Vukin, we want to thank you so much for your time tonight and you all that joined us, as well as those that registered, will be receiving our your Dr. Vukin, I just want to make sure. Did you say that you were sharing your presentation? I think I heard you say something about sharing slides.
I'm happy to. Yeah, I might
Okay,
get with you afterward to figure out how to do
absolutely.
that.
So we will share your slides. Thank you so much for offering up that. We'll also be sending you some Hill resources and our survey. And please complete our survey. We definitely, truly appreciate your responses as it helps us to plan for future Hill Connect seminars. Our next one is actually, I had it right here, and of course it went right off my screen, is January 13th. We will have Peg Dawson on Zoom. And that is Keeping It Together, Supporting Organization and Time Management Skills with Dr. Peg Dawson. So thank you again, Dr. Vukin, and all have a good night.